11.3, Jackson and the Bank. So we're going to go over the Google slide presentation that I had sent out to you. So first we're going to start with just some basic essential questions. You can sort of read those about Jackson's feelings towards the bank, how it's going to impact the election, how Jackson's decision to kill the bank is going to actually impact the country, and then finally, why was the election of 1840 so important? So here we are, this is where we're beginning, so find this in your Google Drive. So our first question says, why does Jackson dislike the Bank of the United States? So there's many problems with Jackson and the bank, and most of it starts with personal issues. So at first he just does not like the president of the bank, Nicholas Biddle. Nicholas Biddle and he could not be more different. Jackson is a man who loses both parents before he's 15. He is self-educated. He's basically a self-starter. Everything that he does, he's can drop his temper at the drop of a hat. He gets really involved in things. Nicholas Biddle comes from a well-to-do family. He is well cared for. He is well educated. He runs in the best circles. All these types of things and do not make Nicholas Biddle endearing to Jackson. And Nicholas Biddle tended to have a streak in him that let everyone know that. Now, the other thing that he dislikes about the bank is the people who are running it. He feels that it's run by wealthy Easterners who he does not like and does not trust. Plus, remember, Jackson is both a Southerner and maybe a Westerner because, yes, he's born in South Carolina, but he really grows up in Tennessee. And so this deals with that sectional feeling of different parts of the country. And last but not least, the reason why he really dislikes it is he feels that it's unconstitutional, that it's an overreach of the federal government, that government back then should be small, and the idea of the involvement of the banking interest is a group that he did not want to be a part of. So once Jackson's in, he realizes he has it in his power to get rid of the bank or kill the bank. And so how does he do that? Well, first thing he does is that he is able to change the fund deposits that go periodically into the Bank of the United States. So the first thing he does is decide that he is going to end federal deposits into the Bank of the United States. The other thing that he decides is that he is going to make this an issue in the upcoming election against the emerging either National Republicans or basically the Whigs. And so he's going to make it this issue. And the problem is both sides believe that they're on the right side. The Whigs and the Democrats believe that the public is with them. So the Whigs feel that the public likes the bank and that if Jackson, as he threatens to do, veto the new bill to renew it, he would, of course, face their anger. Democrats, on the other hand, felt that the American public did not really like the idea of a bunch of bankers controlling these funds that are not actually appointed or run by the people. And so in the election, what happens is the Whigs basically read the situation wrong, and the public sides with Jackson, and he wins in a pretty convincing fashion in 1832 for his second term. So in his second term, that's where, of course, the movement continues with the idea of the Indian Removal Act that had been passed in 1830. And so we move forward and look towards the next election between the two sides. And Jackson, of course, is not going to be running because he has served his 2 terms following the precedent of Washington and decides to step down. So we're going to answer this question: who do the Democrats push to run in 1836 in the place? And it's this man, Martin Van Buren. He is Jackson's vice president in the second term. He is from New York. And so he runs in 1836 with Jackson's backing. Okay. Now, the new party that emerges at the time are the Whigs officially become a new political party. And in this election, Martin Van Buren does not have much trouble defeating a field of various Whig candidates. They sort of cancel each other out. But what happens next is a terrible economic event that supposedly they could not see on the horizon that occurs right after the 1836 election. And so what that is the Panic of 1837. So the Panic of 1837 is really pretty much what we would call a depression. Land values go down, unemployment goes up, businesses fail, banks fail. It's just not a good economic time. And so, we refer to it as a depression. If the economy slows, we call that a recession. If it continues to slow and get worse over time, months and months and maybe a year or more, it could be described as a depression. Most of you would know of the depression of the 20th century, but this is a pretty big one in the 19th century. And what Martin Van Buren's reaction to it is causes the things to get worse. So he is a Democrat, and he believes in this thing known as laissez-faire. And what that is, it's a French term that means to keep your hands as the government out of the economy and do not try and alter it or get involved in it through a government intrusion. The problem was his decision to do that worsens the crisis. And as the public gets more and more frustrated by the condition of the country, things are not getting better as we approach the next election. And Democrats are starting to argue amongst themselves, and it's opening the door for perhaps a new party to slip in as a dominant party like the Democrats begin to fight between themselves. So as the parties fight, the Democrats fight, the Whigs decide that they are going to nominate somebody different. They're not going to run Henry Clay this time. They had run him before. He had not done very well. And so they go back and think, who can be a good candidate? And they pick on this older gentleman who had been a war hero before the War of 1812. Yes, almost 30 years before. And that man's name, of course, is William Henry Harrison. Okay. And the person that's going to run with him is a former Democrat by the name of John Tyler. So John Tyler and Harrison run, and this is one of the first times they start working with those idea of slogans. Remember, started back during the time of Jackson. And the new slogan that gets everyone's attention is Tippecanoe and Tyler too. And let me just explain that. Tyler, of course, is clear. That's a reference to his vice president. Tippecanoe is a reference to William Henry Harrison's previous military experience, if we recall, before the War of 1812, when he was governor of the Indiana Territory. Remember, there had been various attacks on the frontier, and so William Henry Harrison, being the military governor, decides to make a preemptive strike against some of these Shawnee Indians, if we remember the Prophet and his brother Tecumseh, and what was a battle at a place known as Prophetstown, but it gets the name Tippecanoe because of a nearby creek, the Tippecanoe Creek. And so he and his forces are able to defeat the forces of the Prophet at that battle in 1811. So that's where we get the Tippecanoe and Tyler too. The image that the Whigs use is this one. Basically, it is a log cabin. So the log cabin is there not because either of these men were actually born in a log cabin, but it was their effort in trying to identify with the common man. That's always been a striving point for a lot of candidates, is to be most popular with the largest group. And so obviously most Americans at the time would have either raised in a log cabin, their parents might have been born and raised in it, so they felt that he was like them, and that's what the purpose of the picture was. So this is actually an ad from the time. The problem is Harrison nor Tyler were born in or grew up in log cabins. They basically came from more well-to-do backgrounds. Harrison's family knew the Washingtons. They go back, that far. And so he was born in a mansion of more than about, a dozen or 14 rooms. He's well educated. He is the last son of 6 kids, and so he realizes he's not going to get the land anymore, so he goes into the military. And the point is, that's the difference between the reality and then what they want you to believe. And so you see these images were also, this is another one from the actual time period. Down here it says General Harrison. So that's like a spade for those of you looking at it and going, what kind of, tool is that? So this is supposed to be, him standing there in front of a log cabin. Again, more imagery, more ads. You can sort of see they're working that idea of him being a general and also being a man of the people. Over here, you can sort of see him drinking like the average citizen. And then finally down here, you can sort of see they're getting better with the imagery of good old William Henry Harrison. And again, the cabin. All right. Now, in the election, they are able to defeat the incumbent, Martin Van Buren, and win the election. Now, in the election, remember we had talked about the emergence of mudslinging between candidates, and it continued at the time. And so what the Whigs went after Martin Van Buren, who was the president at the time, is that there was some news that came out that he had spent some money on refurbishing and changing some of the furniture in the White House, and they went after that. They seized on it that he was somehow wasteful or, spending money frivolously on, unneeded furniture, and that became a big thing that got everybody's attention and anger, that he's wasting the public's money. The other thing is that he tended to be a man that cared about the way he looked, and was concerned that he looked, like a monarch, and so they call him King Martin. Sometimes they thought of him as a, stuck-up snob, that he thought he was better than people. And then also a word to introduce is a dandy, which if you look it up, it's basically a guy that's overly concerned about his appearance and not so much about his job. And so that was one thing they went after Martin Van Buren about. So Van Buren does not win, and good old Harrison does. But what happened shortly after the inauguration is poor old Harrison got a cold. The cold turns to pneumonia, and the pneumonia takes his life 31 days into his presidential term. He was 68 years old at the time of his death. So it's important, and I know that some of you put down that he's the first Whig president. True, but what's even more important is this is the first time a sitting president is replaced by a sitting vice president due to the death of a president while in office. So this is the first time we have a man die in office and has to be replaced. And John Tyler is that man that comes in. And I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the death of Harrison because it's kind of interesting. First of all, Harrison has a connection to Harrisburg. William Henry Harrison and the Whig Party in 1839 through their Whig convention right here in the great old city of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Yes, that is where William Henry Harrison accepted the nomination for president of the party known as the Whig Party. So it does actually tie in with the local area. Now, Harrison ran a good campaign, but he was a little bit worried about the two big things that they tried to paint him as. One was sort of a commoner, kind of everybody man, which sort of left him with the idea that people did not believe of him as very intelligent. And the other thing that they poked fun at was his age, thinking him old and then feeble. And so to counteract that, at his inauguration, he made some very unique and very troubling choices. One was that he decided that to show that he was tough and not feeble and old, he would show up just in his suit without a jacket. He was an older man, and that was what he had decided to do. I'm going to show up and show I'm tough. I can take the elements. It was snowing on March the 4th, 1841. And then the other thing that he wanted to go against was the idea that he wasn't that smart. And so what he did was give the longest inaugural address in U.S. presidential history. More than 2 hours long he spoke. And in this driving snowstorm in March, it was wet and it was damp, and he got sick. And that sickness eventually will take his life. So he's inaugurated March 4th and dies April 4th. So I'm just going to end it here, remembering good old William Henry Harrison and his famous Tippecanoe and Tyler 2. And some people, if you want to research this, believe that there's a beginning of a curse of presidents who are elected in years ending in 0, not being able to finish out their term and still live. So you might want to do some research right now and figure out which presidential election years end in 0. So after him, it would be 1860, 1880, 1900, 1920, 1940, 1960, 1980. And figure out which guy broke the curse. So we'll end it there, and thus ends chapter 11.